They said my life was perfect. Lillian Hunt, CEO, a name synonymous with success, a woman who architected her own destiny, a beautiful Boston home, a supportive husband, a radiant daughter. It was a flawless facade. But what happens when the one thing your meticulously engineered life hasn't accounted for, the one desire you're not supposed to entertain, walks into your meticulously ordered world in the form of a man half your age, an intern with eyes that see too much? What happens when that forbidden spark threatens to incinerate the foundations of everything you've built, everything you claim to hold dear? My name is Lillian Hunt, and this is the unvarnished, unfiltered confession of how I gambled with ruin, how a hidden hunger almost cost me everything. Stay with me, because the first casualty of a secret passion is always the carefully curated truth. Before we plunge into the inferno, make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss a single damning revelation of how a perfect life can so spectacularly unravel. What dark desire are you hiding behind a flawless smile today? At first glance, my existence was indeed a portrait of enviable success, the kind glossy magazines and aspirational blogs might feature with breathless admiration. I, Lillian Hunt, am a successful businesswoman, the founder and CEO of a thriving, innovative software company. I clawed into existence from sheer grit and relentless ambition. I was, or so it appeared to the outside world, and perhaps even for a long time to myself, a happy, contented wife to my college sweetheart Jack, a man whose quiet steadfastness I had long taken for granted. I was a devoted, involved mother to our effervescent, bright spark daughter Emma, whose laughter was, for too long, the one untainted, uncomplicated melody in my increasingly discordant, internally dissonant life. But perfection, as I've learned through bitter, painful, life-altering experience, is often, if not always, the most elaborate, most convincing, most dangerous illusion. Not everything behind the gilded, imposing doors of our spacious, meticulously decorated Boston suburban home was as serene, as harmonious, or as simple as the carefully, almost obsessively, curated images we projected to the world suggested. Someone, an unexpected seismic tremor in the otherwise predictable landscape of my middle age, had entered my life, turning my well-ordered, rigidly controlled universe onto its precarious, dangerously unstable edge, forcing me, with an almost brutal insistence, to re-examine every cherished truth I thought I knew, every sacred vow I'd ever solemnly made, every fundamental assumption upon which my entire adult identity was built. How does a woman like me, a woman of considerable intellect, of proven capability, a woman who seemingly had it all, the career, the family, the financial security, the societal respect, end up entangled, almost willingly, almost eagerly, in the intoxicating, forbidden, potentially catastrophic embrace of an intern? A boy, really, young enough to be, well, significantly, shockingly younger? This is the unvarnished, often uncomfortable, deeply personal story of how insidious, unacknowledged passion and long-buried, fiercely suppressed desires can violently, irrevocably disrupt the familiar, cherished, ostensibly secure order of a seemingly settled life. So, immerse yourself, if you dare, in my world, a complicated, morally ambiguous world where every seemingly small decision, every stolen, electrifying glance, every whispered, dangerous word led with an almost Greek tragic inevitability to a devastating cascade of unforeseen, unintended, yet ultimately life-altering, soul-shaping consequences. They say with an almost casual cruelty that life at the peak of professional success, especially for a woman in a male-dominated field, is a relentless, dizzying, almost impossible balancing act, a constant, exhausting tightrope walk over a chasm of potential failure and societal judgment. I lived that punishing, unforgiving adage every single day of my adult life. Every morning, without fail, the pale, often reluctant New England sun would filter, almost apologetically, through the expensive, custom-made silk blinds of my sprawling, architecturally significant home nestled in one of Boston's quieter, more affluent, almost aggressively discreet outskirts. I'd perform the well-rehearsed, almost robotic ritual of domesticity, make a wholesome, organic, nutritionally balanced breakfast for Jack, whose quiet, increasingly remote presence at the breakfast table had become more of a familiar, slightly uncomfortable habit than a source of genuine comfort or connection. And for our precious, precocious, perpetually energetic Emma, whose innocent, untainted laughter was, for too long, the one pure, untainted, genuinely joyful melody in my increasingly discordant, internally conflicted, almost schizophrenic life. Then the swift, almost jarring transformation from seemingly contented suburban wife and mother to the dynamic, high-stakes, unforgiving arena of my downtown office, where another demanding, invariably stressful, almost certainly 16-hour day of critical decisions, power plays, and relentless pressure invariably, unavoidably awaited me. My company, a bespoke software development firm specializing in cutting-edge AI solutions, was, in many ways, my other, more demanding, more rewarding, more predictable child, a creation nurtured over 10 relentless, exhausting, all-consuming years from a fledgling, improbable startup conceived in a cramped, borrowed back office into an acknowledged, respected, multi-million-dollar industry leader, a testament to my unwavering vision, my relentless drive, and my almost superhuman capacity for sheer, unadulterated hard work. This hard-won achievement, this gleaming, tangible monument to my fierce, almost desperate ambition, had been purchased, I knew only too well, with a precious, irreplaceable currency of countless caffeine-fueled sleepless nights, of years of adrenaline-fueled, gut-wrenching stress that gnawed at my insides, and of innumerable, almost forgotten weekends, holidays, and family milestones sacrificed, often without a second thought, without a moment's hesitation, at the unforgiving, insatiable altar of professional progress, of corporate success. I wore my chronic exhaustion, my ever-present under-eye circles, my perpetually frayed nerves, almost like a perverse, self-congratulatory medal, a badge of honor in the brutal take-no-prisoners corporate wars. And yes, a fierce, almost aggressive, possessive pride pulsed, throbbed through me whenever I contemplated what I, Lillian Hunt, a woman from a modest, unremarkable background, had managed to build to accomplish in a world still so heavily, so stubbornly weighted against women in leadership. Yet, beneath that polished, impenetrable, almost armor-like veneer of unwavering confidence and hard-won accomplishment, a subtle, insidious, pervasive disquiet had, in recent months, perhaps even years, taken root, spreading its tendrils like an invasive, malignant weed through the carefully cultivated, meticulously ordered garden of my ostensibly perfect life. Lately, I'd been feeling different. Disconnected, untethered, a strange, indefinable, almost existential melancholy, like a persistent, nagging, low-grade fever, hummed, almost audibly at times, beneath the deceptively smooth, successful surface of my days, a jarring, discordant, almost alien note in the otherwise triumphant, almost deafening symphony of my worldly success. I'd find myself with increasing alarming frequency staring out of my expansive, panoramic, almost obscenely luxurious corner office window, not at the impressive, almost arrogantly beautiful Boston city skyline spread out before me like a conquered kingdom, but at some unfocused, indistinct, almost invisible point in the far, hazy, unreachable distance, a gnawing, inexplicable, almost unbearable emptiness echoing, reverberating in the meticulously organized yet emotionally barren chambers of my surprised, confused, increasingly troubled heart. This profound, unsettling disquiet was a relatively recent, entirely unwelcome, yet stubbornly persistent tenant in the house of my soul, making me question, with a new, terrifying, almost heretical intensity, the very foundations, the very choices, the very sacrifices upon which my seemingly perfect, universally admired, yet increasingly hollow life was so precariously, so dangerously, so deceptively built. Had I began to wonder with a sickening, dawning horror, climbed the treacherous, exhausting ladder of worldly success with such relentless, single-minded, almost ruthless determination, only to discover at the very pinnacle, at the supposed moment of ultimate triumph, that it had been leaning all along against the entirely, catastrophically, heartbreakingly wrong, empty wall. The once reassuring, once validating silence of my myriad professional achievements began, with an alarming, deafening crescendo, to feel crushingly, suffocatingly, terrifyingly empty. Jack, my steadfast, supportive, infinitely patient Jack, had always, throughout our long, eventful, often challenging, yet hitherto seemingly solid marriage, been my anchor, my rock, my unwavering, unconditional source of strength and comfort. Or so I'd sincerely, fervently, almost desperately believed. So I'd repeatedly, almost ritualistically, told myself and anyone who would listen for years. A comforting, reassuring, almost talismanic mantra against the rising, often overwhelming tides of relentless career pressure, societal expectation, and periodic yet manageable bouts of existential middle-aged doubt. But somewhere, somehow, almost imperceptibly at first, then with a gathering, undeniable, heartbreaking momentum, along the winding, often diverging, increasingly separate road of our shared, yet increasingly unshared journey, an invisible, almost soundproof, emotionally impenetrable wall had slowly, silently, almost stealthily materialized between us, a wall built not of sudden, dramatic betrayals or explosive, cathartic anger. Those, at least, might have offered a discernible target, a path to confrontation, a possibility, however slim, of eventual resolution, of reconciliation, of healing. No, this insidious, suffocating wall was far more subtle, far more insidious, far more silent, far more deadly, in its almost imperceptible yet relentlessly progressive construction, a slow, creeping, almost glacial, emotional erosion, the inevitable tragic result of years, perhaps even decades, of unspoken, unacknowledged, festering resentments, of divergent, incompatible dreams, of individual, often competing professional ambitions taking relentless, consuming precedence over the fragile, demanding, easily neglected ecosystem of connection, of intimacy, of shared vulnerability. Our conversations, once vibrant, spontaneous, endlessly meandering, joyfully discursive tapestries woven with the rich, colorful threads of shared dreams, lively, stimulating intellectual sparring, silly, private, almost childish inside jokes, and the comforting, reassuring, almost sacred minutiae of everyday shared domestic life had shrunk, almost imperceptibly at first, like a favorite wool sweater carelessly washed in hot water. Then, with an alarming, undeniable, almost shocking finality to mere brittle, almost transparent threads of bare, functional, almost transactional necessity, stilted, awkward logistics concerning Emma's increasingly complex school schedule, terse, almost hostile discussions about overdue household repairs, polite, almost formal, utterly superficial inquiries about each other's demanding, undoubtedly stressful day that expected and invariably received equally polite, equally superficial, utterly uninformative, surface-level, almost pre-scripted responses. We spoke, when we spoke at all, which was with decreasing, alarming frequency, the sterile, impersonal, almost contractual language of distant, emotionally disconnected housemates, of business partners in the flagging enterprise of our family, not the rich, nuanced, intimate, soul-bearing language of lovers, of soulmates, of life partners. Our kisses, those once passionate, once reassuring, once essential affirmations of unwavering, unconditional connection and profound, exclusive, intimate desire, were now perfunctory, almost brotherly, almost insulting, fleeting, dry, meaningless pecks at the beginning and end of a long, exhausting, largely separate day. Empty, hollow, almost robotic duties performed out of ingrained, unthinking habit, or perhaps even more damningly, out of a lingering, misguided, almost cowardly sense of societal obligation, rather than desires spontaneously, joyfully, passionately, authentically expressed. The vital, life-sustaining warmth had completely, irrevocably leached out of them, leaving only a cool, dry, almost dusty, deeply unsatisfying residue of what once was, of what might have been. The nights, oh, the nights were the absolute, undisputed, unmitigated worst. The true, stark, unforgiving measure of our rapidly growing, almost unbearable desolation, vast, empty, echoing, almost Arctic stretches in our ridiculously oversized, ostentatious, yet strangely, profoundly empty, king-sized bed. The ever-widening physical space between our two still, silent, unmoving bodies, a tangible, heartbreaking, almost taunting manifestation of the vast, unbridgeable, ever-deepening emotional chasm that now so tragically, so completely, so irrevocably separated us. The silence in that shared, yet utterly unshared space was more resonant, more damning, more heartbreaking, more terrifying than any shouted, accusatory, rage-fueled argument could ever possibly hope to be. I lay there, night after solitary, agonizing, soul-crushing night, the relentless, unforgiving minutes stretching like a medieval torture device into interminable, suffocating, almost unbearable hours, staring with wide, dry, unblinking, almost desperate eyes into the oppressive, accusing, almost sentient darkness, wondering with a hollow, persistent, almost physical, unbearable ache deep in the core of my being. What precisely, what specifically, what catastrophically had fractured, had shattered, had died so completely, so irrevocably, beyond any hope of repair, beyond any possibility of redemption? What vital, life-sustaining, irreplaceable component of our once vibrant, once passionate, once unbreakable love had been so carelessly, so thoughtlessly, so tragically lost, or perhaps even more damningly, even more unforgivably, so willingly, so casually, so criminally, so suicidally surrendered along the treacherous, unforgiving, memory-strewn, ghost-haunted way, piece by unnoticed, unmourned, irretrievable piece? Perhaps routine, that silent, insidious, relentless, passion-asphyxiating, soul-numbing killer of intimacy, of spontaneity, of connection, of joy, had finally, irrevocably, completely consumed us, leaving behind only the hollow, brittle, almost transparent shell of a once thriving marriage, a sterile, loveless partnership in name only, a carefully, almost obsessively maintained, socially acceptable facade for the sake of our precious, innocent, unsuspecting daughter, and for the sake of upholding at all costs our carefully, almost pathologically cultivated public image of bourgeois, enviable domestic bliss. Or maybe, just maybe, a far more terrifying, far more self-indicting, far more difficult to accept, yet increasingly undeniably plausible thought. I had changed, fundamentally, irrevocably, almost unrecognizably, metamorphosed by the relentless, unforgiving, all-consuming pressures and the intoxicating, addictive, almost narcotic triumphs of my demanding, exhilarating, yet ultimately, perhaps, emotionally stunting career into someone he, my once adoring, once adoringly gazed upon husband, no longer recognized, no longer understood, no longer connected with, or perhaps a possibility too painful, too devastating, too utterly unbearable to truly, fully contemplate, no longer desired, no longer cherished, no longer, in any meaningful, authentic way, loved. The Lillian he had so passionately, so devotedly, so completely fallen in love with all those seemingly countless, sun-drenched, carefree years ago, the idealistic, slightly bohemian, fiercely independent, passionately romantic, almost ridiculously optimistic art history student with literal actual stars in her eyes and a fierce, unwavering, almost childlike belief in the enduring transformative power of love, in the absolute certainty of happily ever afters, was now a distant, faded, almost unrecognizable memory. A pale, irrelevant, almost pathetic ghost of a former, more vibrant, more authentic self, cruelly, unceremoniously replaced by this driven, ambitious, often ruthless, emotionally armored, perpetually exhausted, high-powered, take-no-prisoners CEO who negotiated complex multi-million-dollar international deals with far more ease, with far more confidence, with far more success than she navigated the increasingly treacherous, unfamiliar, almost alien, intimate terrain of her own rapidly deteriorating, tragically failing marriage. I tried, desperately, almost heroically, with all the formidable, steely, almost legendary willpower I possessed, the willpower that had propelled me to the very pinnacle of my demanding, unforgiving profession, to push these corrosive, unsettling, deeply, profoundly soul-disturbing thoughts aside, to banish them to the darkest, most inaccessible recesses of my mind, to pour every single precious, finite ounce of my considerable yet not inexhaustible focus and rapidly depleting energy into the familiar, controllable, ultimately blessedly distracting, if ultimately profoundly unsatisfying, challenges of work, my professional fortress, my gilded cage, my only remaining, albeit increasingly inadequate sanctuary from the unsettling, inconvenient, profoundly unwelcome truths of my rapidly unraveling, deeply, terrifyingly unsatisfactory personal life. But then, on a day that began with an almost aggressive, almost defiant, deceptive, almost insulting ordinariness, under a sky of bland, indifferent, almost cruelly, mockingly, beautifully, achingly blue, everything, absolutely everything, irrevocably, terrifyingly, seismically, wonderfully changed, shattering in a single, blinding, cataclysmic instant, the carefully, painstakingly, almost obsessively constructed, ultimately fragile, tragically transparent illusion of my perfect, enviable, yet profoundly, deeply, soul-crushingly empty life. That, as fate, or perhaps just random, indifferent chance would have it, was the fateful, life-altering day, a new cohort of bright-eyed, eager, almost painfully young summer interns, fresh from the hallowed, ivy-covered halls of academia, brimming with untested theories, boundless optimism, and a touching, almost heartbreaking naivety about the true, often brutal nature of the corporate world, joined our bustling, perpetually caffeinated, chronically sleep-deprived, high-octane pressure cooker office. Among them, a name that would soon, with an almost shocking, terrifying rapidity, be seared, branded, almost tattooed, not just into my consciousness, but into the very fabric, the very essence, the the very core of my unsuspecting, unprepared, soon-to-be redefined soul, Oliver. He was, even in that first cursory, almost dismissive glance, an immediate, undeniable standout, though not, I must stress, not initially, not consciously, in a way that registered as a personal, visceral threat, a potential romantic interest, or anything remotely beyond a remarkably promising, unusually charismatic, undeniably talented young man destined, with an almost palpable certainty, for great, impressive, almost inevitable things, perhaps even idly, fleetingly, professionally mused, within the rapidly expanding, ever-evolving structure of my own globally successful, highly competitive company. He was tall, enviably so, with the lean, fluid, easy, unself-conscious, almost poetic grace of a natural, gifted athlete, a refreshingly boyish, almost breathtakingly disarming, utterly, completely, almost unfairly captivating smile that crinkled with an almost unbearable charm the expressive corners of his intelligent, observant eyes, and a laugh so genuine, so spontaneous, so uninhibited, so utterly, wonderfully infectious, it could, and often did, momentarily, miraculously, almost magically, dispel the office's typically high-strung, caffeine-fueled, deadline-driven, almost perpetually stressed, palpably tense atmosphere, like a sudden, unexpected, wholly welcome, life-affirming burst of pure, unadulterated, almost physical sunshine on a relentlessly, depressingly, soul-crushingly overcast, typically Bostonian day. He was young, impossibly, achingly, almost tragically, beautifully young, barely, just barely, a tender, vulnerable, almost heartbreakingly innocent 22, a stark, vibrant, almost painful, deeply unsettling contrast to the seasoned, often cynical, invariably world-weary, frequently embittered executives I encountered, and indeed, with a growing, dawning, unwelcome sense of self-awareness, increasingly, disappointingly, almost shamefully embodied daily. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, his youth, his very newness, his untainted freshness, there was an intensity, a vibrant, unjaded, almost incandescent, wonderfully hopeful spark in his clear, intelligent, startlingly, almost unnervingly perceptive, soul-searching eyes that I hadn't encountered, or perhaps more accurately, simply hadn't allowed myself to truly, fully see, to truly, deeply acknowledge, to truly, vulnerably respond to, in anyone, least of all, most tragically, in myself, for a very, very long, barren, emotionally desolate, spiritually arid, almost forgotten time. It was a spark, I realized later, with a pang of poignant, almost unbearable regret, of pure, unadulterated, untapped potential, of boundless, infectious optimism, of an almost childlike, yet profoundly powerful belief in the inherent, unwavering goodness of the world, a belief that I, somewhere along the treacherous, disillusioning, soul-hardening path of my own ambitious, relentless, often ruthless journey, had irretrievably, tragically, unforgivably lost, or perhaps, even more damningly, had it slowly, systematically, almost surgically, beaten out of me by the harsh, unforgiving, often cruel, invariably cynical realities of the brutal, take-no-prisoners, emotionally eviscerating corporate battlefield. Oliver was assigned, by a seemingly innocuous, almost laughably random stroke of purely administrative, almost bureaucratic fate, a casual, almost thoughtless placement by an overworked, underpaid, undoubtedly stressed, almost certainly indifferent HR coordinator shuffling resumes like playing cards. Or perhaps, as I would later, in the lonely, accusing, almost inquisitorial hours of countless, agonizing, sleepless, guilt-ridden, soul-searching nights, endlessly, obsessively, almost masochistically ponder by a more cosmic, insidious, inescapable, almost preordained misfortune, a cruel, ironic, almost taunting twist of some unseen, unknowable, perhaps even malevolent, universal design to my specific, high-profile, critically important department, under my direct, albeit initially almost entirely distant, and meticulously, almost obsessively, professionally appropriate, almost chillingly detached, purview. I noticed his considerable, almost startling, undeniably impressive potential almost immediately. Certainly within the first few days, during his first formal, slightly nervous yet remarkably articulate and insightful departmental presentation on emerging global market trends and potentially disruptive, game-changing next-generation technologies. He wasn't just intellectually bright, effortlessly, almost dazzlingly articulate, and impressively, almost intimidatingly armed with the latest, most cutting-edge, often arcane theories and meticulously researched, data-rich case studies from his prestigious, almost mythical Ivy League university, a veritable breeding ground for future leaders, for future titans of industry, for future masters of the universe. He was also, far more importantly, far more captivatingly, almost preternaturally intuitive for someone so young, so seemingly unseasoned, so ostensibly inexperienced in the cynical, often treacherous ways of the corporate world. He was diligent, almost frighteningly so, beyond any reasonable or even unreasonable expectation for a summer intern, relentlessly, almost fiercely, yet always charmingly, politely curious, and always, without a single solitary notable fail, ready, even visibly, palpably eager to help, to learn, to contribute, to go the extra, unasked for, often unacknowledged mile, his infectious, almost boyish, completely disarming enthusiasm, a refreshing, revitalizing, almost life-giving antidote to the jaded, cynical, almost terminal weariness that so often, so pervasively, so depressingly permeated our otherwise dynamic, high-pressure, relentlessly results-obsessed, frequently soul-crushing corporate environment. Within a matter of mere weeks, a remarkably, almost unbelievably short span in the usually glacial, slow-moving, tradition-bound, almost feudal world of established corporate hierarchies and deeply entrenched pecking orders, he transitioned with an almost startling, seamless, almost preternaturally effortless ease that bordered on the uncanny, on the almost magical, from a peripheral, eager to please, slightly awestruck, almost endearingly naive intern, one of many bright young faces passing through, to an indispensable, highly valued, universally respected, almost revered, if still somewhat informally, member of our core elite strategic development team, his fresh, unblinkered, often brilliantly unconventional, almost heretical perspective, frequently, almost routinely, cutting through a complex, seemingly intractable, maddeningly, frustratingly convoluted, almost Gordian knot-like impasse with startling, elegant, almost breathtakingly beautiful Zen-like clarity and deceptive, almost childlike simplicity. He made us all, even the most jaded, most cynical, most change-resistant, most world-weary veterans on the team, demonstrably, measurably better, sharper, more creative, more innovative, more engaged, more hopeful, simply by being there, by his very presence, by asking the deceptively simple, yet profoundly insightful, often courageously challenging, occasionally almost embarrassingly obvious questions that no one else, in their comfortable complacency, in their ingrained fear of looking foolish, in their weary resignation to the status quo, dared or perhaps even bothered to ask any more. At first, I consciously, rigorously, almost fiercely, with a stern, unwavering, almost puritanical internal resolve born of years, of decades, of hard-won, often painfully learned professional discipline, and a keen, almost paranoid awareness of the myriad potential pitfalls, the ethical minefields, the career-ending scandals inherent in ambiguous, ill-defined power dynamics, particularly between a senior female executive and a junior male subordinate. I tried, with all the considerable, almost legendary willpower at my command, to maintain my professional distance. The invisible but critically important, ethically mandated, legally defensible, almost sacred boundary between a powerful, married, older female CEO and a young, attractive, charismatic, single male intern, a veritable Pandora's box of potential complications, of potential misunderstandings, of potential career-destroying accusations. He was too young, I told myself repeatedly, almost obsessively, like a desperate, self-hypnotizing mantra, a raw, untamed, vibrant, almost feral, dangerously unpredictable energy that felt both dangerously, intoxicatingly, almost addictively alluring and alarmingly, professionally, ethically, morally, catastrophically inappropriate. A walking, talking, charmingly oblivious ticking time bomb of an HR nightmare just waiting, almost eagerly, to explode, to detonate, with devastating, far-reaching, irreversible consequences for everyone involved, most especially for me. He was too handsome, I rationalized, with a detachment I didn't entirely feel, in that careless, sun-kissed, effortlessly charming, almost heartbreakingly beautiful, all-American golden boy way that can make a woman of a certain, less golden, age, a woman in a position of significant, often isolating power and visibility, acutely, uncomfortably, almost painfully, embarrassingly aware of her own carefully, almost obsessively maintained, often expensively, almost artificially constructed, inevitably, relentlessly aging facade, the subtle yet undeniable, almost mocking lines etched by time, by stress, by responsibility, by the relentless, unforgiving, almost cruel, unstoppable march of years. Lines that no amount of expensive cream, no artful makeup, no cleverly deployed lighting could ever entirely, convincingly, permanently erase. But the intense, unforgiving, all-consuming, almost alchemical crucible of shared, high-stakes, deadline-driven, emotionally charged, almost intimately collaborative work, the relentless, unavoidable, almost claustrophobic, strangely intoxicating proximity of complex, demanding, intellectually stimulating projects, and looming, unforgiving, career-defining, almost life-or-death deadlines, began to subtly, insidiously, almost imperceptibly at first, then with gathering, alarming, almost irresistible momentum, erode those painstakingly, almost desperately self-imposed, professionally mandated, ethically crucial, yet increasingly, terrifyingly, wonderfully fragile, almost transparent boundaries. We often, almost routinely, stayed late. Very, very late. Long, long after the last diligent, conscientious, presumably happily married, emotionally balanced employee had gratefully, sensibly departed for their presumably more balanced, less complicated, emotionally fulfilling, appropriately age-appropriate domestic lives. Long after the vibrant, energetic, almost deafening, chaotic hum of the daytime office had subsided, had faded to a low, expectant, almost conspiratorial, strangely, wonderfully intimate, almost sacred thrum. The myriad, glittering, almost indifferent, yet strangely, wonderfully beautiful city lights painting iridescent, mesmerizing, almost surreal, almost magical streaks across the panoramic, floor-to-ceiling, almost invisible glass windows of my silent, isolated, increasingly welcoming corner office, my gilded cage, my lonely, lofty, yet suddenly, wonderfully, terrifyingly, less lonely, less isolating, ivory tower. We'd be hunched, often for hours on end, almost shoulder to shoulder, our bodies in an easy, unforced, yet undeniably, thrillingly close proximity, over glowing, accusatory, demanding yet ultimately wonderfully conquerable spreadsheets, dissecting intricate, often baffling, deliberately obfuscated contradictory market analyses, or brainstorming innovative, potentially game-changing career-making or, just as easily, career-breaking paradigm-shifting campaign strategies for hours upon exhausting, exhilarating, mind-numbing, mind-expanding, seemingly blessedly, wonderfully endless end. And in those charged, quiet, intensely focused, increasingly frequent, almost ritualistic, strangely sacred late-night hours, something more, something far more potent, something infinitely more dangerous, something that hummed, that vibrated, that throbbed with an undeniable, illicit, almost forbidden, dangerously, wonderfully, magnificently intoxicating energy, began to subtly, almost imperceptibly, yet inexorably, unstoppably, wonderfully, terrifyingly, develop between us, a silent, unspoken, yet deafeningly loud, almost telepathic understanding, a deep, resonant, almost frighteningly intuitive connection, a dangerous, thrilling, almost unbearable intimacy. Every shared, lingering, electrically charged, almost shockingly, wonderfully intimate glance across a crowded, polished, intimidatingly long, almost comically phallic boardroom table. Every accidental, fleeting, yet shockingly, disproportionately, almost supernaturally resonant brush of his warm, youthful, surprisingly strong hand against mine as we reached simultaneously, inevitably, almost magnetically, for the same carelessly dropped document, the same rapidly, disappointingly cooling coffee cup, the same elusive, borrowed, suddenly significant pen seemed to physically, tangibly, almost painfully, wonderfully electrify the very air, the very molecules, the very essence of the space around us, leaving a lingering, unspoken, tantalizing, terrifyingly, wonderfully dangerous awareness, a palpable, almost visible, shimmering energy in its wake, an awareness, an energy that both profoundly, deeply, almost spiritually thrilled and utterly, completely, almost fatally terrified me in equal, overwhelming, paralyzing, yet strangely, wonderfully, invigoratingly, life-affirming measure. One particular, grueling, almost spirit-breaking, soul-testing evening, the ambitious, high-stakes, make-or-break, almost legendary project we were spearheading, a critical, potentially company-defining, next-generation, paradigm-shifting software launch that had already, with an almost vampiric insatiability, consumed untold months, if not, in fact, years of our collective professional lives, our precious, irreplaceable personal time, our very finite, rapidly depleting emotional sanity, demanded an urgent, unforeseen, almost cruelly timed, all-hands-on-deck, last-minute, crisis management, nail-biting, career-on-the-line push to meet an impossibly, almost sadistically tight, utterly unreasonable, almost certainly unachievable deadline imposed with a breathtaking, almost regal indifference to our mortal limitations by an impatient, out-of-touch, almost comically clueless, yet terrifyingly powerful board of directors who resided, for the most part, in a distant, rarefied, almost mythical realm of quarterly reports, stock options, and golden parachutes, utterly removed from the messy, exhausting, blood, sweat, and tears reality of actual software development. Gradually, predictably, almost ritualistically, as the relentless, unforgiving hours bled, almost literally, almost painfully, into one another, the sprawling, multi-floor, usually bustling, almost frenetically energetic office emptied, department by department, floor by floor, cubicle by lonely, deserted cubicle, until only the rhythmic, almost hypnotic, increasingly intimate, almost conspiratorial, strangely comforting click-clack of our two keyboards, a strange, private, almost sacred duet in the vast, empty, suddenly resonant symphony hall of the otherwise completely deserted, almost ghostly office, and the soft, sighing, almost mournful, strangely, unexpectedly comforting whisper of the building's powerful, ever-present, almost sentient HVAC system. A mechanical heartbeat in the otherwise tomb-like silence broke the profound, enveloping, almost tomb-like, strangely, wonderfully, unexpectedly peaceful, almost meditative silence. Oliver and I remained, the last two dedicated, or perhaps more accurately, simply unhinged, obsessively, almost pathologically driven, gloriously, wonderfully deluded souls in the vast, echoing, suddenly cavernous, almost eerily, supernaturally silent, yet strangely, wonderfully, liberatingly intimate space, fueled almost intravenously by lukewarm, bitter, almost undrinkably vile coffee, stale, unappetizing, grease-congealing, cardboard-tasting takeout pizza, and a shared, intense, almost manic, mutually reinforcing, almost telepathically communicated, adrenaline-fueled, almost superhuman focus that bordered, quite frankly, on the unhealthy, on the unsustainable, on the certifiably, gloriously, wonderfully obsessive, when we finally, miraculously, almost anticlimactically, with a whimper rather than a bang, hit a natural, desperately needed, almost divinely, mercifully ordained stopping point. A critical, potentially catastrophic, career-ending, company-sinking bug identified, isolated, hunted down, and then, with a shared, almost primal whoop of triumphant, if utterly, completely, bone-deeply exhausted, almost hysterically, deliriously joyful elation, definitively, satisfyingly, gloriously, wonderfully squashed, a monumental, almost tidal, almost biblical wave of bone-deep, soul-crushing, almost physically debilitating exhaustion mixed, paradoxically, yet wonderfully, with a potent, heady, almost dangerously, wonderfully intoxicating sense of shared, hard-won, almost heroic, world-saving accomplishment washed over me, leaving me feeling giddy, disoriented, lightheaded, almost drunk, and strangely, dangerously, almost recklessly, wonderfully, gloriously vulnerable, stripped bare, almost flayed alive of my usual, formidable, almost impenetrable professional armor. My carefully, almost obsessively cultivated, almost pathologically maintained emotional defenses, leaving me feeling raw, exposed, open, and terrifyingly, wonderfully human. On an impulse I wouldn't, I dared not explain. An impulse I couldn't allow myself to properly, rationally, prudently, professionally analyze. An impulse born, I told myself. I rationalized. I almost believed, of sheer, unadulterated, almost hallucinatory fatigue, of overwhelming, almost incapacitating relief, of a sudden, inexplicable, almost desperate, reckless, yet undeniably, wonderfully powerful desire for something more, something different, something human, something real, something, dare I even think it, something alive. I heard myself, as if from a great, echoing, almost disembodied, strangely calm distance, suggesting dinner, the single, loaded, innocuous, yet potentially cataclysmic word falling, almost unbidden, almost traitorously, from my suddenly dry, suddenly clumsy, suddenly wonderfully insubordinate lips. To finalize, of course, the absolutely critical, utterly indispensable presentation strategy for tomorrow morning's undoubtedly crucial make-or-break career-defining board meeting, I added, almost as an afterthought, with a mental speed and improvisational agility, a sheer, unadulterated, almost breathtaking audacity that surprised, that shocked, that almost delighted even myself, the hastily, almost sloppily constructed, transparently, almost laughably, pitifully flimsy justification, feeling utterly, completely, almost insultingly inadequate, almost embarrassingly transparent, even to my own tired, overstimulated, dangerously, wonderfully suggestible, rapidly deteriorating ears. What are your takeaways from my story, from my choices, from my imperfect, ongoing, often bewildering journey of self-discovery and often painful yet ultimately necessary transformation? Do you truly believe it's possible to find true, lasting, authentic happiness, genuine, sustainable peace, after causing such profound, widespread, undeniable collateral hurt, such devastating, often irreparable, emotional damage to those one once loved, perhaps still loves, in some complicated, fractured, imperfect way? Share your wisdom, your insights, your experiences, your questions, your judgments, your hopes, your fears in the comments below. I genuinely, truly, desperately want to hear them, to learn from them, to connect with them. If this story, in all its messy, uncomfortable, inconvenient truth, resonated with you in any way, however small, however fleeting, if it touched a chord, however faint, however discordant, however unwelcome, within your own unique, complex, precious experiences, within your own beautiful, fallible human heart, please give it a like and consider sharing it with others who might also be navigating their own complex, challenging, often bewildering, frequently painful, yet ultimately, hopefully, growth-inducing emotional landscapes. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories, more confessions, more raw, unfiltered, honest explorations of the intricate, often heartbreaking, always compelling, endlessly fascinating, magnificently, terrifyingly, wonderfully complex realities of the human heart.